So this week in AI, there's been a pretty surprising development. It's definitely got people in the tech world talking, and maybe even a little shocked, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. It's not just another announcement, it seems like. The speed at which this company DeepSeek is moving and how efficient they claim to be, well, it's got everyone's attention from like industry leaders to, you know,
But and for this deep dive, you were kind enough to share some articles with me. Specifically, there were a couple from CBC and CNET. And yeah, these gave us a really solid base to understand what exactly is going on here. So our mission today is pretty straightforward, I think.
Mm,
We want to figure out just who is DeepSeek, why they're causing such a stir,
hmm
and what it all means for the future of AI. And think of this as like your shortcut to understanding a major shift that's happening in tech right now.
I like that. A shortcut.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea of how impactful this already is, DeepSeek's app has actually climbed all the way to the top of Apple's App Store and even overtaken ChatGPT in terms of downloads. So that's a pretty clear sign that something big is happening. So, okay, let's get into it. First things first, who exactly is DeepSeek?
Well, DeepSeek is actually a pretty new player in the AI world. They were founded pretty recently in 2023 by a guy named Liang Wenfeng, who comes from, get this, a hedge fund management background. And they're based in Hangzhou, China. Now, what makes DeepSeek really stand out is their focus on open source large language models, or LLMs. And that open source part is really key here. It's like they're sharing the blueprint of their AI models, allowing other developers to use, modify, and build upon their work without any restrictions. This could potentially lead to a much wider and faster development of AI applications compared to if the technology was kept, under wraps.
So open source, that's a fundamentally different approach compared to what we see with some of the big names in AI who tend to keep their technology very proprietary. And for such a young company to be launching an AI assistant that's already being considered a rival to the big US tech companies, that's pretty impressive.
It really shows they've hit the ground running. So let's talk more about their technology. What kind of models are we looking at with DeepSeek? What can they actually do?
So DeepSeek functions as a conversational AI, much like some of the popular models you're probably familiar with. It understands and responds to natural language. Pretty intuitive to use. And right now they're offering two main large language models. The first one is DeepSeek V3. And from what we've read, this model is all about speed, and it can handle a range of tasks that you typically expect from, say, a standard ChatGPT. So we're talking things like quickly generating text, rewriting emails, summarizing documents. It's geared towards those quick everyday uses that people are looking for.
Okay, so that puts them right in the mix with the general AI assistant market.
Yeah.
What about the other model?
So the second one is called DeepThink, specifically DeepThink R1. And this one is their more advanced model, aiming to compete with models like OpenAI's GPT-4 and Google's Gemini Pro. DeepThink R1 is designed for more complex reasoning tasks. And here's a key thing. Both of these models are currently free to use. You can access them through web browsers or their mobile apps, which are available on both iOS and Android.
Wow, free access. That is a big difference, especially when you see a lot of the other more advanced AI tools moving towards subscription models.
Exactly. And the articles really highlighted just how quickly this app gained popularity. In fact, by late January 2025, the DeepSeek app had become the #1 most downloaded free app in both Apple's App Store and Google's Play Store in the US and many other countries around the world. So that rapid adoption really speaks volumes about the level of interest and the impact they've already made.
It's pretty amazing. Surpassing ChatGPT in downloads, that's huge. What do you think is driving this quick adoption? Is it just the free access, or is there something more to it, something about the quality or the usability of their AI?
It's probably a combination of factors. The fact that it's free removes a lot of barriers for people to try it out. But for it to shoot to the top of the app stores so quickly, it suggests that users are actually finding real value in what DeepSeek is offering, whether it's the performance of their models or maybe even some unique features they have.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned DeepThink R1 is geared towards more complex reasoning tasks. Is there anything particularly unique about how it works or what it shows the user?
Oh yeah, DeepThink R1 has this really interesting feature where it actually shows you its thought process as it's working. It also displays the time it took to generate an answer. This kind of transparency is not that common in other AI models, and it really gives users a peek behind the curtain to see how the AI is arriving at its conclusions.
That's a fascinating approach, almost like inviting the user into the AI's decision-making process. And didn't the CNET article mention they're also getting into image generation?
Yes, they've also launched an AI image generator called Janus Pro, And this is clearly meant to go head-to-head with the likes of DALL-E 3, Stable Diffusion, and Leonardo. So they're not just sticking with text-based AI, they're branching out into the visual AI space as well.
That's a smart move, expanding into that rapidly growing area.
Definitely. Okay, so now that we have a better idea of who DeepSeek is and what their technology can do, let's talk about the part that's really got everyone talking. I'm talking about their claims of being incredibly cost-efficient. What's the story there?
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Reports have come out saying that DeepSeek's new R1 model cost them a mere $6 million to create. Now, to put that into perspective, there have been reports that OpenAI's GPT-4 had a development cost of around $100 million.
That's a massive difference.
It is. It's a huge difference. And that's what sent shockwaves through the industry. That gap in cost is just mind-boggling. It challenges the whole notion of how much money you need to build advanced AI.
And this claim, if true, would completely change how we think about the resources needed for AI development. And I remember reading that this news had an almost immediate impact on some major tech companies.
Absolutely. Right after the news about DeepSeek's cost efficiency broke, the stock prices of companies like NVIDIA and Broadcom took a pretty noticeable dip. These are the chip makers, the ones supplying the hardware for a lot of this AI development. And we're talking about a combined market cap loss that could be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So the market clearly reacted very strongly to what this could mean for the future demand of high-end computing hardware.
So how did DeepSeek supposedly pull off this level of cost efficiency? What's their secret sauce?
Well, according to DeepSeek, it comes down to two main things. First, they say they use less advanced NVIDIA H800 chips for training their model instead of those more expensive, top-of-the-line H100 chips that a lot of other companies are using. And second, they're claiming that they've developed some pretty innovative training methodologies that allow them to make the most of their resources without sacrificing performance. It's like they're suggesting that maybe you don't need the absolute bleeding-edge hardware to develop cutting-edge AI.
That's a pretty bold claim. But the CNBC article mentioned a report that questioned these numbers, right?
Oh, yeah, that's an important point. There's a report from a research firm called Semi-Analysis, and they estimated DeepSeek's actual cost to be well higher than $500 million over the company's history. So now we've got a bit of a debate and some uncertainty around those initial claims. This report implies that the $6 million figure for the R1 model might not be giving us the full picture.
So if that 6 million figure is potentially misleading, does that mean DeepSeek's achievement is less significant? Or is there still something noteworthy about their efficiency, even if the cost is higher?
Well, even if we assume that 6 million is a lowball estimate, if they've managed to significantly reduce the development cost for a comparable model, that's still a big deal. I mean, it's still a game changer.
Right. And the CNET article even suggested a few other possible explanations for the difference in the reported costs.
Yeah, there's some speculation that DeepSeek might actually have access to a lot of restricted NVIDIA H100 chips, maybe obtained through unofficial channels, and they're not being transparent about it because of U.S. export regulations. That's all speculation, of course, but it does raise some questions about the accuracy of their cost and resource claims.
It sounds like the true cost picture might be a bit more complicated than it first appeared. But whether or not the exact numbers are completely accurate, the perception of these huge cost savings has definitely made a big impact. So let's talk about how the big players in tech have reacted to DeepSeek's sudden emergence. The CNBC article had some interesting quotes from a few tech CEOs.
Yes, the reactions have been mixed, but mostly acknowledge that DeepSeek is a force to be reckoned with. For example, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella pointed out their real innovations and mentioned that DeepSeek's R1 will soon be compatible with their Copilot Plus PCs and Windows GPUs. He compared the development of AI to the regular computing cycle, suggesting that as technology progresses, costs naturally become more manageable, which benefits everyone in the end.
That's an interesting take from Nadella, implying that these lower costs might be a natural part of how AI evolves. What about Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO? He's arguably DeepSeek's most direct competitor at the moment.
Yeah, well, Altman actually called R1 clearly a great model, and he agreed that it should serve as a wake-up call for the U.S. He recognized that the competition has increased and acknowledged the growing interest in reasoning capabilities and open-source models, something that DeepSeek's emergence has definitely highlighted.
So even though he acknowledges the competition, Altman seems pretty confident that OpenAI can stay ahead of the game. What about some of the other tech leaders? I think Alex Karp, CEO of Palantir, had a pretty strong reaction.
Oh, yeah, he did. He basically said that the U.S. needs to step up its game and put in a serious national effort to compete with DeepSeek. He stressed that they need to run harder, run faster, and his words definitely conveyed a sense of urgency and concern about the U.S. falling behind in this technological race.
There's definitely a sense of urgency there. What about Apple and Meta? Their CEOs seemed a bit more cautious in their responses.
Yeah, Apple CEO Tim Cook kept it pretty general. He basically said that innovation that leads to greater efficiency is always a positive thing. So he didn't really mention DeepSeek directly, but he did highlight the value of innovation that makes things more efficient. And Meta's CEO Mark Zuckerberg basically said that it's too early to have a strong opinion on how this will impact infrastructure and spending in the long run. So he's taking more of a wait-and-see approach.
Okay, so there's a real mix of responses, from urgent calls to action to more measured observations. It really shows how uncertain but potentially significant DeepSeek's arrival is. The CNBC article also mentioned that former President Trump even weighed in on this, echoing Altman's wake-up call sentiment and highlighting his administration's efforts to strengthen U.S. AI infrastructure through an initiative called Project Stargate.
It's interesting to see how this is transcending the typical tech world boundaries and becoming part of a larger political conversation.
Definitely. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the broader market impact of DeepSeek's emergence. We already touched on the stock market volatility, but what about other impacts?
Aside from the initial stock market jitters, Mark Andreessen, the well-known Silicon Valley venture capitalist, made a pretty impactful statement. He called DeepSeek's entry into the AI scene a Sputnik moment for artificial intelligence.
That's a strong comparison.
It is. It suggests that DeepSeek has the potential to really disrupt the AI landscape in a major way, similar to how the Soviet Union's Sputnik launch back in 1957 really pushed the U.S. to accelerate its space program. It's a powerful way to frame the potential shift in the balance of power in the global AI landscape.
Right, it suggests a possible turning point. The CNET article also mentioned something about DeepSeek being targeted by cyber attacks.
Oh yeah, amidst all the hype and attention, DeepSeek apparently got hit by a number of cyber attacks. This forced them to temporarily restrict new user registrations. It just goes to show that their sudden rise to prominence hasn't gone unnoticed, and they've become a target.
It definitely seems like DeepSeek has shaken things up in the AI world, creating a lot of excitement and also a good deal of debate. So taking everything into account, what do you think is the overall significance of DeepSeek bursting onto the scene like this?
Well, I think the significance is multi-layered. First of all, DeepSeek has challenged the assumption that you need massive amounts of money to develop advanced AI. Their claims of low-cost development suggest that you might be able to achieve significant progress with more efficient methods and maybe even with less advanced hardware. And this could really open up the field AI, making it more accessible for a wider range of players.
That could be a game changer, breaking down barriers for people who want to get involved in AI development.
Exactly. Second, DeepSeek's low-cost approach could really put the pressure on big players like OpenAI and NVIDIA to change the way they do things. OpenAI might have to work harder to justify the pricing of their models and their subscription services, and NVIDIA might see changes in demand for their high-end chips if companies realize they can get similar results with less expensive hardware.
That makes sense. Competition often drives innovation and efficiency. And third, DeepSeek's rise really highlights the growing competition in AI development on a global scale, especially between the U.S. and China.
Right, it's a reminder that the U.S. isn't the only one leading the charge in AI anymore. Other countries are making big strides and potentially reshaping the global tech landscape as we know it.
Okay, so to recap our deep dive today, DeepSeek, a relatively new AI company from China, has quickly become a big name with its AI assistant and its claims of incredibly cost-effective AI development. This has generated a lot of interest and some concern among the big U.S. tech companies, and it really highlights how intense the global competition is becoming in the AI race. The key takeaway here is that a new player has seemingly figured out how to achieve major advancements in AI, but at a fraction of the cost. And that's got everyone thinking.
That's a perfect summary. You've really nailed the key points we've covered.
So to our listener, here's a final thought for you to ponder as you absorb all this information. Given that DeepSeek is all about open source and this potential for much lower development costs in AI, how do you think this might change the landscape? Could it speed up access to AI technology and how it's used in various industries in different parts of the world? What new applications or even new challenges might come up as AI development becomes more globally distributed? It's a development with massive implications to think about. And with that, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great having you.
It's been a pleasure.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.